Welcome, my name is Chris Potts and I'm the Executive Director of the Historical Society of Harford County. This year the county is turning 250 years old and we are celebrating. August 19th we are going to be having a special event called Night at the Ballpark at Leidos Field and Ripken Stadium, where we are going to be celebrating 250 years of Harford sports. We're going to be highlighting the athletes, the coaches, the teams, really honoring those people that distinguish themselves in sports in the county and celebrating that history together. Today, what we're going to do to get you interested and excited and ready for that big event is I've invited a panel of people to join me, including the illustrious Todd Holden, a writer and photojournalist, Mac Lloyd, who is a retired sports editor for the Aegis and also co-founder of the Sporting Times magazine, and my co-chair and former wrestling coach of some distinction and prominence, Keith Watson. I wanted to start today with talking about the legends and some of the legendary names that came up and who will be honored as notable Harford 250 athletes are, of course, the Ripkens, the Henderson brothers, E.J. and Aaron, Irv Pankey, the other brothers, Dudley and I believe Charles Bradley, yeah, in the NBA. We also have sisters, the Jones sisters, Brown and Stephanie Jones, and the WNBA. And then, of course, you have your individuals of Kimmy Meisner, Falston, becoming the 2006 champion figure skater, and George Hector, who competed at the world and national level. Powerlifter, yeah, from North Harford. But there are also individuals who achieved legendary status who are no longer with us now, and yet their reputations and the effects they've had on the Harford community continue to endure. And two of those individuals that I want to talk about, and I want to invite you to talk about, are Bill Brown and Al Seski. So let's start with Mr. Brown. Bill Brown, Bel Air native, drafted into World War II, comes back home, goes to Morgan, becomes a track star there, and then goes on to achieve something rather remarkable at the Pan Am Games, correct? So
yes.
51, had the part of the relay team, got gold.
Gold medal.
Then in the 800, wins the silver.
Silver, right.
I was wondering, were people aware of the accomplishments that Bill Brown was winning these medals at the time back in the 50s, and was that on the radar? Were people talking about it?
Well, yes, that was mentioned in the Aegis when I worked there. That was that was pretty well known fact.
So
people who were into sports would have known that.
Right. So it was being covered. The reason I asked that is because he goes on to do some rather astounding things as a coach.
Right.
And so Mr. Brown started working, I think, in 1950 at Central Consolidated in Hickory. And during that 15 years, he achieves a number of state championships. In the book that the Historical Society put out, an anthology in their own words, both Todd and Mac are in the anthology, but Margaret Ferguson writes about Bill Brown and talks about his athletic achievements, but also the role he played at Central Consolidated and the championships that he led different teams to. She reports that he had 8 state titles in track, 6 in cross country, 2 in basketball. During integration of Harford County Schools, he then transfers to Bel Air, and what Waddy found out was, or put forward when we were talking about these dynasty teams, is that he went on and had led teams to championships there in tracks.
He was my coach.
He was your coach. Mm-hmm. Tell us about it.
I was a shot putter, discus thrower, and he was the coach of. He was the overall coach of the track team, and then Mr. Gross was the coach for the shot putter disc people. But I had Mr. Brown for gym and as a coach. And I can tell you, I was with some friends the other day that graduated near me in 81, 82. We imitate Mr. Brown all the time. We talk about him all the time. And, you know, you talk about remembering people. He'll never go away in our minds. That much of an impact.
That much of an impact. He was inducted into the Harford County Educators Hall of Fame, and as Margaret Ferguson writes about, one of the things that they talked about was that not only did he have incredible athletic talent, but he was also a scholar and someone who really played an important role in the history of integration in the county by bringing together black and white students and
Correct.
sort of easing that transition. So an extraordinary story to tell. Another coach whose legend endures is Mr. Seski, Al Seski. And I thought it was interesting that when Mr. Brown came to Bel Air, it was in '65, Mr. Seski was sort of transitioning out of Bel Air. He retired in '65. It was after his third undefeated season. I wanted to invite you to talk about your memories of Mr. Seski, and not just what Mr. Seski's work developing the football team at Bel Air, but also what that football team meant to the community. Erica Butler writes about Mr. Seski in their own words, and she talks about how at those Friday night football games, 5,000 to 7,000
Yeah.
people would come. Can you take us to one of those games? Describe for us.
There was nothing bigger in the county. It was a rural community, mainly dairy farmers and factory workers at Beta or the Proving Ground. But on Friday night, there was nothing going on other than a football field. They drew thousands of people. This is no exaggeration. And even though you didn't have a kid on the team, you knew a guy that had a kid on the team that was a quarterback or a receiver, and the crowds turned out, my goodness. I mean, if you weren't at a football game on a Friday night and then over to Rubens Drive-In afterwards, or Coombs's White Star in Edgewood, you didn't have any kind of social life at all. And the athletics, they were pure. These kids, a lot of them were farm kids, and their notoriety, their recognition, their self-esteem came from doing something on that football field. Some of them had scholarships that would never have been able to afford to go to college. But it was the place to be Friday night under the lights.
Yeah, so Mr. Seski really took an interest in the future of his athletes, and it seems like that was carried over after his death. I believe he died in '85, and at that time, the Al Seski Foundation, after that was established, Erica Butler reports in her piece that they've awarded over $1.2 million to some over 700 young men and women who are scholar athletes. So it just so happens that one of our notable athletes was one of those Al Seski scholarship winners. One of the athletes that we will be featuring is Andrew Berry, who was a quarterback at Bel Air, cornerback at Harvard, and now general manager of the Cleveland Browns.
That's unreal, isn't it?
It is
that
unreal.
cool?
Cleveland Browns general manager, so yeah.
Can I say something about Seski?
Please do.
So my dad is a little younger than Todd, maybe two years maybe, and I grew up hearing. My dad didn't play football, but I grew up hearing about Al Seski. We lived all over the country because he was in the service, and it's like hearing about the Colts and the Orioles. No matter where we lived, we heard about him because that was such a big deal, and Al Seski was a big deal to my dad.
Yes, Al Seski was a big deal to my dad too, and I remember a story my grandmother told about Al Seski. My father lost his father at around about the time when he was first going to college. My grandfather died, and of course my father took it rather poorly, took it hard, so my grandmother was worried about him, and she called up Mr. Seski one night when she wasn't sure where he was, and Mr. Seski said, I'll find him. And he found him working out in a gym. My dad remembers him coming in, and he looked up at him, and he said, "Mom sent you." And she had. So that was the kind of.
You know, Al was
kind of
also
person.
a Cracker Jack baseball coach at Bel Air, too. He had some mighty good teams. He had a lot of kids to pick from, but there was a lot of talent there, too. That was a huge.
You know, I was on the Harford, the National Wrestling Hall of Fame committee that chose the people to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And there was a guy named Al Miller that coached
Oh, yeah.
over at Perry Hall.
Yeah.
And he spoke very highly. Al helped him got him a scholarship for, I think it was Millersville.
And before that, Ronnie Miller, I think was younger.
Ronnie
than Al.
Miller, yeah.
He went to Vanderbilt on a football scholarship.
Okay.
On
And that-
Sesky Say So.
That was a big deal.
Well, Sesky had a talent. You got to give credit where credit is due. He's a big deal, and he did a lot. But Sesky had a tremendous ability to attract other coaches. Tom Penrod, Pat McCarthy, Whitey Wright.
Pat Hennessy.
These guys, Pat Hennessy. I mean, he had. It was a magical mesh of super good coaches and super talented kids. And when you got that, you got a lot of super talented kids that never get to play football. And it just, everything worked beautifully with his staff. And they were top-notch people.
And concerning his own athleticism, that's what brought him, I understand, to Bel Air, because he had been playing semi-pro baseball in the Eastern League.
That
Eastern
sounds
League.
right.
Yeah, he'd been playing semi-pro baseball, came with a college roommate up to play semi-pro football in something called the Big Red. Now,
Big Red.
Mr. Holden, you sent me something about Big Red football.
Yeah.
You want to tell us about it? I want to tell you what you told me it was.
Go ahead.
Grown men playing serious football in a pasture. So tell us about
That's
that.
true.
Pretty much.
Vic Noyes, a notable philanthropist in the area out near Hall Street, had a big horse farm. And Big Red, which was farmers mainly that just wanted to get up and knock the hell out of somebody. And there was no pads. Few of them did have a helmet. And it was called Big Red, and they were unbelievable. And crowds, now you got Friday night football, then Sunday afternoon, you got Big Red. It didn't bring as many people, but it was incredible football to watch these guys. And then limping off the field, go to work on Monday, back on the farm or in a factory.
So this is no pads.
No, the lucky guys would take pillows and strap them on their shoulders, and some of them had like a mouth guard so they wouldn't get their teeth. A lot of them didn't have any teeth, and it didn't matter. But it was just great. I mean, it was, you'd see the guy throw up Billy Greer, Lawson Sayre,
Favorite class.
KO class, Bobby was too little. But they would get out there and just amaze us that we were only 35 yards or 35 feet, not on television. We're seeing a great catch or a great run.
I think Baker Harwood was.
Baker Harwood, yeah.
That was a flag team, but that was really a competitive brand of football. We played a lot of teams from over by the city, Baltimore and so forth. I guess we were.
We were the only team that was integrated. And they used to meet at a bar down on Route 40 to have the team meeting. And myself, Tommy Brummel, and Sammy Sheets I managed and did some things and wrote some things. And Sammy and Tommy, and we went and they asked for a roster. And they recognized the name John Spriggs. John Spriggs was a black athlete from Edgewood, semi-pro boxer. We always liked guys like that on the team. And he can't play. And what do you mean he can't play? We've had practice. I mean, and we started to walk out of the league meeting and they acquiesced and said, okay, we just don't want you to get a lecture. You know, those days are gone forever. And good riddance, I say. But he better not cause any problem. Now, Tommy Brummel is going to cause more of a problem than John Spriggs. And we won 2 years in a row. We beat everybody. And remember?
I sure
I
do.
mean, it was just awesome to come back to Bel Air and that trophy.
Did you get any notoriety through the paper?
Oh, a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I took care of that.
And that was what, you guys played in the spring or the fall?
It was in the spring of the year we started practice, and then by the fall we had a rule. Brummel was the coach, and Brummel had a rule, and it really, it scared me, but the rule was if you don't make 3 practices, you don't play on Sunday. That was his rule. And some really good guys like Dennis Dunn, Joe Phipps, Doug Bazemore, they would miss a practice. And I told Brummel, you know, man, we need that guy in there. He said, I didn't say the whole game.
Just want to start.
And and then they would get in the game.
Well, now you said you made sure that they got coverage. Were you working at the Aegis at that time?
Yes.
Okay.
And were you the sports editor then, or was that Coach Penrod?
No, it was Pete Slayer.
Pete Slayer. I would come to Robbie with pictures, Mac Lloyd catching a ball. I mean, Mac went to North Harford. There was no football. So Mac got to play football on Big Red. And well, no, it's true. Big Blue, I'm sorry.
Blue.
And I have these good pictures. And Robbie was saying, oh, we can run this one. You got any more? Yeah, I've got to know. And we got our publicity. We actually had a sponsor. It wasn't much of a sponsor, but Al Neville at Bel Air Sporting Goods did give us a football one year and a first aid kit.
So there you had it. You had
important things.
You had a sponsor, you had media, and you had old.
We had the media sewed up.
You had media sewed up. You had new football players, football players from Alcesky. Now, mentioning Alcesky again, I wanted to say, about some of the other coaches that Keith and I were talking about, looking at these dynasties, these legacy teams. Keith did an interview with Alice Puckett, who I would say has created quite a program for herself. Do you want to talk a little bit about Alice Puckett and what she accomplished?
I can't believe that I've been around as long as I have and didn't know that Falston had 14 field hockey state championships. Yeah. I guess I just wasn't on my radar, but that's more than significant. I don't know what else you could call it. And she actually said, "Oh, we were second to Severna Park many times," and Severna Park was a bigger fish than they were. But Alice. Alice did a fantastic job. She handed it over to an assistant coach and helped her assistant with transition for a little while. And then she, I guess, just took a little bit of a break and then circled back and started coaching John Carroll and immediately went out and won the IAM. And Alice is something else.
Yep.
It's like she can't have enough jobs to do. She also helps, well, she just moved down to the Carolinas, but she was helping her brother and nephew run the Hopkins Brewery. Get that off the ground. And
she's a farm girl.
Yeah, that's something.
She grew up on a farm. Again,
she's Alice Hopkins, her maiden name.
Right.
Well, she created quite a program, and she's one of our notable coaches, and we'll be honoring her along with some other ones, including Matt Parks, who
coached Falston. The Falston boys lacrosse.
Yep.
And we have Dick Slutsky, who is basically the guy that taught me how to coach. Right. Who had a three-peat team after 16 time in a row. They won the Harford County Uckback Championship.
Consecutive state titles.
And then 3 state titles in a row back in the late 80s. And a fantastic coach and the smartest guy I know. In fact, we were just interviewing Mike Atkins, 8-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion. And he said Dick Slutsky's the best coach the state's ever seen, and for wrestling. And he basically has never wrestled for Dick, and he could see how good he was.
Well, I wanted to mention another really good coach. These are his stats. He coached wrestling, Bel Air, John Carroll, 2-time Maryland Wrestling Coach of the Year, 2015 National Prep Coach of the Year, member National Wrestling Hall of Fame, 298-63 record over 13 seasons at John Carroll, coached national champions in 2009, 2015. That's you, Mr. Watson.
That'd be me.
Now, Mr. Watson recused himself from being recognized as one of the notable coaches for Harford 250 notable coaches because of the fact that he was so involved in putting together this event. But I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you a few questions about coaching.
Okay.
Now that I have you here. So first, what brought you to coaching?
Just feeling like I had unfinished business, not being a good wrestler. My head coach was Mark Giacovetti, and Mark Giacovetti was a good motivator, but he wasn't the best at teaching this sport. If you were good at the sport, you were learning it elsewhere and bringing it to the fall. But he taught me how to deal with young men and how to motivate them and so on. But I felt like I always had, if I had a little more time, a little better coaching, I might have actually been able to do something. So I decided I was going to just go up and roll around with the big guys because that's what everybody always needs is somebody that weighs 200 plus to roll around with a 250-pound high school kid. And I volunteered to do it. And next thing you know, the head coach was also the head football coach. They went 0-10, 0-10 in football. He was removed. So the athletic director said, I came to him 2 weeks before wrestling practice starts, and I said, Gene's not coaching. Who's gonna coach? He said, well, we figured you would. I said, well, you figured I would. Okay. Well, I said, I tell you what, we'll figure this out. And I was starting a business at the time, and I knew enough to know that I knew what I didn't know. And so I go to Dick Slutsky, and he says, I called him up, and he says, meet me over at C. Milton Wright on such a day. We have a match over there, and I'll talk to you. He writes down 6 or 7 things, says, do this when you're done, come back to me. And so basically Dick Slutsky taught me how to coach, and I was at Bel Air for 13 years or 15 years, and if you're not a teacher in the public schools and somebody else wants that job, they're basically going to get it, which is kind of the way it should be. Plus I wanted to do more. I thought I had more, and the public schools, you're hamstrung with certain rules, certain things you can't do. So Dick Slutsky, who had retired from Aberdeen, had been a coach at John Carroll for a cup of coffee. He said, John Carroll's just way too different than Aberdeen. I can't be doing this anymore. I can't do it. Call Keith Watson. So they invited me over, and we did the best we could. Fortunately, they had just hired a new teacher that had wrestling experience, and part of his package for compensation was that he was the head JV football coach. So I talked to him and I said, we got to bring the entire JV football team, get them on a wrestling mat. Well, the next year, and we that worked out great, but we were nobody. Well, the next year, Larry Dukes becomes the athletic director and sort of let me do my thing, don't embarrass me, let me do my thing, and next thing you know, we're the big dog.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been wondering about you and all these other coaches is really what it really takes to build the kind of program to achieve multiple championships or to get to the level of coaching kids all the way up to nationals.
Well, if you're married, it takes a wife that will give you the leeway, because my wife, fortunately, my wife grew up in Western Pennsylvania. She grew up around wrestling. Her brother was a champion wrestler. Her cousins were all champion wrestlers. So she understood. And she saw what I was trying to do, and she was very helpful and so on. So that's very important. If you don't get the support from home, you just can't do it. And then you just have to have the desire, and you have to have the resources. I knew what I didn't know, but I surrounded myself with people that were much better than me, and I made sure those mats were always washed, the kids' grades were right, and I dealt with the administration trying to keep the kids, they're little high-strung 16-year-old boys, trying to keep them out of trouble. But what happened on the mat in terms of teaching the sport, I left that up to other people. I got good enough by watching them that I was certainly passable. But having Matt Slutsky, Dick's son, who's Maryland's first 4-time state champ, as one of my assistants, Tom Reese, who was an All-American heavyweight at the University of Maryland and the state champ at North Carroll, he was another one, and Chuck Hart and Dave Strapelli. Dave Strapelli was instrumental. These guys were there with me all the time. And when the practice was over, then the coaches' practice started, because the coaches got together, we evaluated, and I was always going to the big National Wrestling Coaches Convention. I go there and I sit at a table with Dan Gable, who's a legendary coach. And I could ask him questions. You know, wrestling's different. It's not like the NFL. You never approach Harbaugh, but wrestling is such a small community. I mean, those guys know me. And Dan Gable actually has a story about me being afraid to turn a car around up on Pikes Peak when we were out of Colorado for a coaches convention. I panicked when I saw that there was no guardrail, no trees, and I could see China. The heights got to me, but that's wrestling. I want to beat you when it's time, but otherwise, I want to help. We're going to help each other.
So it sounds like coaching is a team sport, and it's also something that you have to take an interest in the human being, not just the athlete in the moment. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Keith. Todd, I want to return to you. Back to, I want to quote to you a lead from a story I read in their own words. Again, I make mention of this book. Harford and 20th Century Stories was the anthology that we put out, Historical Society put out to help launch the year, edited by our own Carol Dybel. But one of my favorite pieces in here was by you, Todd. I'm gonna start, just read the lead. Oh, you can call him Warrenell, or you may call him Boom Boom. You can call him the Maryland State Heavyweight Champion. In 1959, he beat Burt Whitehurst in 12 bone-crushing rounds. You can call him the All-Army Champion and toss in the All-Inner Services Heavyweight Champion as well. I want you to talk to us about Boom Boom Lester, the man, the fights, and how he was interesting a county and, as you say, turning the county onto boxing. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. He had some major fights with Zora Foley and some fights in Florida, but he didn't have the support that Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay at the time, had. And his fights, he wasn't properly handled. He didn't have a really good manager. He did everything on sheer talent and dedication and training. Trained harder than anybody I've ever known. And the big fight was Wayne Bethea at Baltimore Coliseum. And this would have been a bid for a shot at the title. And for 9 rounds, he had him on points. He controlled the whole fight. And in the 10th round, Bethea caught him with a left, and the first thing that hit the floor was the back of Bootie's head. And he was knocked out. And then it was like, what am I doing this for? And he became quite an entrepreneur. He had a gymnasium on Bond Street. A likable guy, really good guy. His wife Thelma, whose nickname was Bubbles. Wonderful people. Built a nice home with some of the money that he'd won. And went to work at the end at the tank testing ground on Priest Ford Road. He worked down, he didn't drive the tanks, but he worked there. And just a top-notch guy. On the story I did, I wanted to accentuate his hands. And I said, Booty, why don't you just plant one right here? And you don't want me to do that. And I said, yeah, I do. Sorta. And his wife took the picture. And I'm like this, it's kind of a gag shot. But when he died, the funeral home, March, I believe, down in Aberdeen's where the funeral was, and it was an open casket. And in the casket, his hands were folded, and that man's hands were like cinder blocks. He had the physical attributes to be a heck of a good fighter, and he sure was.
Yeah.
We just passed an anniversary. He fought a fellow from New England named Larry Zernitz at the Bel Air racetrack. It was July 24th, 1959. I was 14 years old. My father took me. And that was a good show.
I
There were a
was
lot of
there.
fun. Oh, you were there?
I
Okay.
was there.
And I think it went Boom Boom won, 7th round, I think it was.
Yeah, but I felt bad for the little fella from Connecticut. He wasn't in that good a shape, and they had to put on a show, and they had the boxing ring on the home stretch at the finish line, and all the stands, all the fans.
It was packed house?
I don't know. I don't know.
I didn't recall
kid.
that, but there were a lot of people there.
A lot of people.
And I remember as a kid walking up Broadway in Bel Air. What was the store? Was it an Acme?
Acme.
He worked at the Acme supermarket.
He had jobs where he had to carry things, lift things.
That's what I was.
That's
getting at.
why he was doing it.
The supply truck had backed in off of Broadway to the Acme, and Boom Boom appeared through this giant door that went up, and he picked up a crate of oranges, and I never saw a bicep like that. It popped up there. It looked like
Just
a
naturally
grapefruit.
gifted.
Holy man!
He was a natural. There's no question.
And you talk about how he got his nickname in the story.
Well, the Boom Boom.
It was
And
a
booty.
punch in the mat. It was the boom boom
Yeah,
was punch
yeah,
or not
yeah.
what is the bag?
And he
He
would
said
work
it
the bag.
right. Boom boom Lester. So
And
why this? So it was a great piece. It was a portrait.
good. Thank you.
It was a portrait, and I wanted to move into a discussion now of the sports story, right? What makes a great sports portrait? What makes a great sports story? Todd and Mac, talk to us about that.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it helps to have an interesting subject to start with, and then hopefully whoever you're talking to is more talkative than Mac, and anyway, is free with the information, and you just take it from there. You look for little unique, little maybe offbeat things that maybe a lot of people don't know of. Always keep it honest and keep it fair and as colorful as possible. I think you really try to do a good job on everything you do with, pick the right word and just let them know, let the readers know that you cared how that story ended up.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't just kind of slap words together and let it go at that.
You have to feel.
Yeah.
I've always liked the underdog. Some of the best things I've ever written were about people that most people wouldn't give them the time of day. Steve Nelson, Jim Reds Brewer, some of the characters in the county fascinated me. And athletes, if you let them tell the story, most good athletes are very, like guys that come back from the war, they don't talk about it. And really good athletes, you got to pry it out of them. But if you get if you listen and let them unload, and then you have enough gumption to reach in and pull something out, and then let that grow and nourish itself, and then you got yourself a story.
Yeah.
They tell the story.
Right.
The best tool we have is
Oh,
The ear.
definitely.
So get out of the way. So and let the story unfold. So Mac, big stories you remember that you.
Well, I always thought it was a big deal when, when the local guys went on to college and, played into big time sports. I mean, that was pretty cool. I mean, I could go to, Penn State and watch Irv Pankey. There was 100-some thousand people. And I'm thinking, gee whiz, here I am from North Harford. We never had football till 8 years after I graduated. And, Harford was so rural and everything, and the time elapsed, and here's this kid playing in front of all these people. It's just fantastic. So it was fun. When he played pro ball for the Rams, I'd go to Pittsburgh. They came in, I remember one year, and I'd go to, watch him play, talk to him, do a story, that kind of thing. I don't know that it was a great story, but it was just a fantastic experience for me to do that.
Yeah. One of the things I was wondering about was, do you remember, you and Todd, do you remember the time when women's sports started to become more in the public eye and there was more coverage. I wondered about this because one of our notable athletes is Karen Strout, and she was Baltimore Sun's the first female Baltimore Sun athlete of the year in '78.
Well, as far as the coverage goes, I made it a point to really expand that at the Aegis. And Liz Panis, who was a tremendous athlete at Bel Air High School, her mother, Betty, was a proofreader at the Aegis. So she would lobby me once in a while. And I thought, I got to stay on the good side of the proofreader. So anyway, we expanded that. And then kind of Lisa Silhan, that became her bailiwick as she was full-time.
Wasn't Liz the catcher for Bel Air?
No, that was Shirley Ashburn.
Oh, she was the one that she put the makeup on before the game. She put her makeup on and then a mask over.
Wow. She was ready.
Cool
Yeah,
woman.
absolutely.
Very cool.
She was ready for
Okay,
anything.
You look good back.
But we, the women's sports did well by us at our time. That was only because of Robbie Wallace, who
Yes.
gave us. I had practically unlimited space. One time I remember on Paste Up, we'd be in the Paste Up room on Tuesday night. This is when we were once a week. We'd be finishing up. We'd have 14, 16, maybe 18 pages of sports. One week we had 64 photographs in there and so forth. Robbie, my boss, Robbie Wallace, the editor of the Aegis, Mr. Aegis, came walking through and said, "How's it going?" I said, "Well, Robbie," I said, I think we got 14 pages here, but I have a lot of, look at all this copy I have left over. He said, "Put up 2 more blank pages." That's unheard of.
For an editor to say that to a writer,
Yeah, put 2 more blank pages on.
that's gold.
Can I jump in there with something? As
Don't
an
take
athlete
too long.
growing up in here in the '70s, every Friday morning, because he just came out on Thursday night. No, was it? Yeah, it was Thursday night, or was it Wednesday night?
Wednesday night.
Wednesday night,
Wednesday
but
night.
you had a Thursday date.
Okay, so Thursday morning before school started at Bel Air, we had a team room, and we would all be in there. There'd be like 20 copies of the Aegis. We're looking at the pictures, reading the articles about
Reading the
our
names.
game.
Read
Well,
the names.
our game, the Edgewood game, the North Harford game for the week before.
They were all there.
And then as the time went on, during the course of the year, you would have the kid that was signing a letter of intent to go to
Yep.
Villanova with his parents, and it was at their house. And I remember when you came and you took my picture with my mom and dad on either side of me, sitting at my kitchen table, and right behind us there was a china cabinet. And I remember showing the picture to my grandfather, and he's like, "Hey, there's a china cabinet I made." Hey, what about my hair?
Yeah. I remember being over at Cal Ripken Jr.'s home in Aberdeen when the Orioles drafted him, and got a picture. Dick Bowie was the Oriole guy who actually signed him, and Senior was there, and so that was kind of a big deal too. Had a funny story on Junior. I remember they were in the state baseball playoffs. I can't remember, maybe in Frederick. I think it was Western Maryland somewhere. And it was right after Cal Jr. had been drafted. And I remember he went up to bat for the first time, and this lady who apparently had a son or connection on the other team screamed at the top of her lungs, "The only reason the Orioles signed you is because of your father." And 2 seconds later, crack, he hits the ball off the top of the fence.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, Robbie, we got to give the guy credit. Well, we got to give Dick and John Worthington a lot of credit too, because they hired Robbie, and when I got my job, they just said, just spell the names right, and I said, well, I've never written I wasn't in the clique in high school. I was kind of a nerd. At college, I wasn't on the school paper. I had no experience, but I wrote poetry all the time. And Peter J., my predecessor at the Aegis, was going to go to Vietnam, go to work for the Washington Post. There was an opening, as luck would have it, I get the job. And all Robbie would stress, as far as instructions, were with these athletes, spell the name right, because every kid wants to look at the paper when it comes out. Is their name in the paper? Oh, it's there and they didn't spell it right. That's a no-no. And that was all we went by.
I always felt like I was writing for a scrapbook. So it's going to be in somebody's scrapbook.
That's, I never
And you know
felt
what?
that.
You're right. I mean, I've got articles and articles that you guys wrote
That's really wild.
that's still sitting in the scrapbook my mom put together 40-some years
Yeah,
ago.
I've got stories Robbie wrote when I was in school. So
I've got somebody wrote about me, but the ones about putting a skunk in the Bel Air Theater
Yeah, you-
when I was 15, I did, my mom clipped that out. Yeah, remember this? Okay.
Don't do it again.
No,
Yeah.
Well, I didn't.
No.
One skunk's enough.
One skunk's enough. Yeah. So, I guess going back around to the kinds of coverage, the stories, the things that really got people's attention. There were the big stories, the important athletes, that kind of thing. But Todd, you sent some fun stories too. Some crazy stories about donkey races and greyhound races.
Oh, they had, yeah. And and these, I wasn't at the paper then. I was just a kid growing up in Bel Air, and they had a donkey baseball. Well, it was actually donkey softball. And nobody knew what that meant, but
Right.
we all went. I mean, that's how naive everybody was that many years ago. We're talking the mid-50s, late 50s. And some outfit went from town to town with a herd of donkeys. And the local guys, the big thrill was to get prominent politicians on a donkey and let them make a fool of themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was huge.
Well, can we talk about how that game went? I mean, somebody gets up, hits the ball, and then somebody rides a donkey to first base?
Well, okay, a lot of people hit the ball and fell off the donkey.
So did you hit the ball and then had to get on the donkey?
They had to get back on the donkey, get to first base, but everybody, including the players, I think the donkeys were even laughing. It was funny. And people, they, you know, it was so beautiful back then. Night fast pitch softball was huge
Yeah, my
at
grandfather
the old
played.
Bel Air Elementary, and they would pass a hat. They would pass a hat.
Yep.
And nobody they passed the hat, not one guy. They'd go down the row, okay, like in church with the offering plate. And that's how they paid for the lights.
All right. So, what I wanted to get to with this story about the donkey and the races and the greyhound races, you told
Oh,
about
yeah.
it. Dan
Yeah.
Cole, a postal employee, put on greyhound races on a cinder track in Bel Air Elementary.
Yep.
Raised greyhounds at his home. So
He's got a greyhound burial in the back of his house. We grew up next to him. I weeded his garden. I was like 9. And he took me in the backyard one day, and there's beautiful tombstones with lightning and all these. I said, "What's it?" And it's when a dog would die, he buried the dog in the backyard with a tombstone. But they would have greyhound races on the track at Bel Air, and they only could go in one line. They couldn't go all the way around the track, and they had this rabbit hooked up to a machine and set the dogs loose. And I didn't really care for it that much, but a lot of money was bet on those races
So
because
they were-
nobody knew who was going to win,
yeah.
and that was kind of a fun thing.
Why do sports bring communities together?
Great question.
hometown pride a lot.
Hometown pride.
I think so.
Great question. Well, it equalized. The great equalizer was you get a ball and a bat and you go out there and you play baseball or you throw football, but it equalized everybody. We were all looking for something when we were 8 or 9 or 10.
It was my neighborhood against your neighborhood.
Yeah, neighborhood
No
competition.
ringers.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of joy in it.
You bet.
Yeah.
A lot of fights.
A lot of
A
fights.
lot of people got the hell kicked out of them. You know that.
Part of the deal.
Part of it, yeah.
Well, I want to thank all of you for talking to me today. I'm going to encourage everybody to come out, Ripken Stadium on August 19th.
Maybe.
All you need to do to get your ticket is to go online, Harford 250, www.harford250.org. They'll link you up. You can go to the Historical Society's website. We'll link you up. We want you to tell your friends, reserve your tickets, grab your
Tell
glove.
anybody that you've ever met.
Right, tell anyone you've ever met to come out and join us. It should be a really good time and a great reunion. Thank you to Red Dog Marketing, Advertising, and Video, to Larry Duke for letting us use this studio today. We really appreciate. Thank you for watching us, and we hope to see you again, especially on the 19th. Thanks, everybody.